Almost no name in history carries more mythology than this one. The Rothschilds have been called the secret rulers of the world, a single family said to pull the strings behind governments, wars, and entire economies. You've probably seen the famous quote where a Rothschild supposedly sneers, "I control the British money supply." Here's the first thing worth knowing. That quote is a fabrication. Historians have searched for any original source and found none. It appears only in conspiracy books, not in the historical record, and that matters because the real story of the Rothschilds is genuinely extraordinary on its own. How one family climbed out of a locked, walled ghetto to build the world's first international bank. You don't need the myths to find it remarkable. You just need to separate them from the truth. The story begins with Mayer Amschel Rothschild, born in 1744 in the Frankfurt Judengasse, the Jews' Alley. This wasn't just an address, it was a sealed world. More than 3,000 Jewish residents were crammed behind its walls, living under brutal restrictions. They couldn't leave the alley at night, on Sundays, or on Christian holidays. They were barred from public parks and coffee houses, and even forbidden from gathering in groups larger than two. It was a constant, deliberate reminder of their outsider status. Mayer was meant to become a rabbi. That was his family's plan. But when his parents died, he had to abandon his studies and take an apprenticeship at a banking house instead. There he learned the mechanics of finance, and developed a specialty in rare coins from ancient empires like Rome and Byzantium, the kind of thing European elites coveted. It was a small skill that would open a very large door. Back in Frankfurt, Mayer built a business dealing in those rare coins, and his expertise caught the attention of Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, one of the wealthiest princes in Europe. Wilhelm was impressed enough to make Mayer a court factor, a Jewish financier in the service of a noble. For a man born in the Judengasse, this was a breakthrough, a foothold inside the world of power and capital, and the foundation everything else would be built on. As his business grew, Mayer made a decision that would define the family for 2 centuries. He sent his 5 sons out to establish branches in 5 different cities, Frankfurt, Vienna, Naples, Paris, and London, with 2 standing instructions: do business with the ruling houses and keep the family's affairs in the family. It sounds simple, but it was strategically brilliant. By spreading across the continent, the Rothschilds were no longer at the mercy of any single ruler or any single economy, a built-in hedge against disaster. And by serving the courts of each country they operated in, they earned not just wealthy clients, but a layer of political protection. By the early 1800s, those 5 linked branches had become, in effect, the first bank to operate seamlessly across national borders, able to move money between countries faster and more reliably than almost anyone alive. Their great opportunity was war. The French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, from 1792 to 1815, were enormously profitable for a family that could move gold, cash, and goods across a continent in flames, smuggling and trading essential supplies, and crucially, handling international payments between Britain and the continent despite Napoleon's blockade. In London, Nathan Rothschild financed the British war effort, and his real breakthrough came in 1814, when he won the contract to supply cash to Wellington's army on campaign. You'll often hear that the family cynically funded both sides of the war as a scheme to profit, no matter who won. The reality is more mundane. Cross-border banks of the era routinely did business with many states, including rivals. But the dramatic image of a family secretly engineering both armies is more legend than fact. And then there's the most famous Rothschild story of all. As it's usually told, Nathan's private network of couriers brought him news of Wellington's victory at Waterloo a full day before the British government knew. He then walked into the stock exchange and began visibly selling, tricking everyone into thinking Britain had lost, crashed the bond market in the panic, secretly bought everything up at rock-bottom prices, and made an unimaginable fortune when the truth came out. It's a gripping story. It's also, in its dramatic form, a myth. The courier network was real, and the Rothschilds probably did get the news first. But according to the historian Niall Ferguson, who studied the family's own archives, they had actually bet on a long, drawn-out war. So any quick gains from Waterloo were small. And the family's real fortune was built slowly over the following decade, their capital rising from around £500,000 in 1818 to over £4 million by 1828. The theatrical version of the story, the deliberate market manipulation, can be traced to an 1846 pamphlet written to smear the family. Which brings us to the darker thread running through all of this. Napoleon had been unusually good to Europe's Jews, granting them equal rights and dismantling centuries of discriminatory law. So when a prominent Jewish family helped finance his enemies, it was read by some not as ordinary business, but as betrayal. And as Europe industrialized and old social orders cracked, the Rothschilds became a convenient symbol onto which people projected every anxiety about capitalism, inequality, and change. Over the following century, the family hardened into the central scapegoat of modern anti-Semitism, accused of secretly controlling banks, governments, and the world itself. None of those grand conspiracy claims held up, but they were enormously useful to nationalist and later Nazi propaganda, which built some of its most poisonous mythology around the Rothschild name. It's the reason so much of what people know about this family is fiction in the first place, and why telling the real story means actively pushing the myths aside, because the documented reality was impressive enough. As the wars ended, the Rothschilds shifted into government bonds, insurance, and the stocks of industrial companies, pouring money into railways, coal, iron, and metalworking, genuinely helping to finance Europe's industrial revolution. Nathan secured control of the mercury mines at Almaden in Spain, gaining huge influence over a metal essential to refining gold and silver, and the family became a major refiner of precious metals, eventually operating the Royal Mint refinery. Their political reach was real too. In 1875, when Britain wanted to buy a controlling stake in the Suez Canal, it was Lionel de Rothschild who lent the government £4 million, almost overnight, to seize the shares, a move that made the canal a vital artery of the British Empire and cut the journey from London to India from weeks to days. And in southern Africa, Rothschild money helped finance Cecil Rhodes and the De Beers Diamond Empire. This was genuine, enormous influence. But it was the influence of bankers the powerful relied on, not of secret kings who ruled them. To protect all this, Mayor Amschel had left strict instructions. His will dictated that only male descendants could inherit the family's wealth, which led to extensive marriage within the family itself. Between 1824 and 1877, the great majority of marriages among his male descendants were to cousins, a strategy that kept the fortune tightly consolidated. There was a second, shrewder layer of protection. The Rothschilds deliberately avoided tying their wealth to things that could be easily seized: land, estates, physical gold. Instead, they held liquid instruments, bonds, stocks, and debts. So whenever anti-Semitic violence flared, as it repeatedly did, there was little for a mob to burn or a hostile ruler to confiscate. It was a cold, clever insurance policy against a world that kept turning on them. The family also poured money into philanthropy. In Frankfurt alone, they ran dozens of charitable foundations, funding public libraries, orphanages, hospitals, homes for the elderly, and schools. The honors followed. Mayer's 5 sons were all made barons of the Austrian Empire, and a Rothschild became the first Jewish member of the British Parliament. It's also a documented fact, often tangled up in conspiracy, that the Balfour Declarations of 1917, Britain's statement of support for a Jewish homeland, was formally addressed to Lord Walter Rothschild, as a leading figure of the British Jewish community, and that the family had spent decades funding Jewish settlement. That's the historical record. The leap from the letter was addressed to a Rothschild to the Rothschilds engineered the founding of a nation is exactly the kind of myth that needs to be left where it belongs. For all their reach, the family's empire eventually unwound, branch by branch. Naples was the first to close in 1863, when Italian unification swept away the old kingdom the bank had served. Frankfurt, the original house, shut its doors in 1901, undone by the very inheritance rule the family lived by, when it ran out of male heirs. The Vienna branch met a far darker end. After the Nazis seized Austria, the Rothschilds there had to flee, and Louis von Rothschild was imprisoned and released only after an enormous ransom, with the family's homes, businesses, and art all confiscated. And in 1981, the Paris Bank was nationalized by France's new socialist government. One by one, the great branches fell until only London remained. The Rothschilds are still here, of course. Their interests reorganized in modern times into a single firm, spread across finance, mining, energy, and even a string of vineyards around the world. But the real legacy isn't a secret empire. It's the story of a family that climbed out of a sealed ghetto to help build modern finance, and then became the most mythologized scapegoat in history, blamed for crimes it never committed by people who needed a villain. Their genuine influence was vast but bounded. They were the bankers that kings and governments leaned on, not the puppet masters of conspiracy theory. And underneath it all sits a strange accident of history. If Mayor Amschel's parents hadn't died young, he would have become a rabbi, and none of it, the bank, the bonds, the branches, might ever have existed. Perhaps the most important thing about the Rothschilds is the skill their story forces you to practice, telling the real history from the myth built on top of it.